Thank you, Acting President. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak on this motion, and I do want to thank my colleague Melina Barth for putting it forward, because this is a big issue, particularly for my electorate of Northern Victoria. And I note the motion starts with great concern that Victoria remains inadequately prepared for the forthcoming bushfire season, with excessive forest fuel loads and insufficient mitigation works, and it goes on to highlight a number of issues. And I was walking just in Melbourne early this week while we've been down here for Parliament, and a fire truck passed through and it set off the alarms, the siren going, and it made me think this is what this motion is. The purpose of this motion is to do, to say to the government, action is required and urgent action is required. Just today, we've had on the steps of Parliament a number of people who have put together a book, Our Mismanaged Forests, and John Mulligan was one of those that compiled it, and I thank Ms Barth for her work in having them here to present. But they did speak about the significant concern of the fuel loads in our forest, and talk through the experience of I think he was 94 years of age, just the experience of seeing bushfires over the years and the impact that it's had. And the mountain cattlemen were there represented as well on the steps of Parliament today, and they talked about it not being a fire issue but a fuel load issue. And I know from my own husband's experience with the CFA, I remember a night where he was out fighting fires, and our family stayed at a friend's place because the smoke was very thick. We had very young children at the time, and it just gave me that eerie experience of what it's like. And many have lived through that experience, and I've spoken with a number of residents that have been impacted by bushfires over the years, and it is horrific. It's an experience that no one wants to go through, and communities take a very long time. That recovery process is very long. So we need to do what we can to prevent these situations from occurring. Now, I know Ms Barr spoke to this earlier, and it's also described in the motion itself, but the Victorian Bushfire Royal Commission recommended the annual fuel reduction of at least 5% of public forest area, yet government's current reduction program achieves an average of only 1.5% per year. Now, I have spoken with people who work in forest fire management. They are very concerned. I was contacted recently because they are so concerned by the fuel loads in our forest and the overflow of the lack of maintenance of trucks in our forest, which will inhibit emergency vehicles should the need arise. And that fuel load just doesn't make any sense. This government, we see under this government, they've been closing down firewood collection areas, and yet there is so much in our forests, and if that was managed better, it would certainly reduce some of the risk. Now, we've also heard, and we have, as has been said, raised concerns about the 290 G-Wagons and 59 Unimogs, critical frontline firefighting vehicles that were taken offline due to chassis and subframe faults. Now, it was good to hear Mr Gaelle speak earlier about some of those vehicles being back online, but the question is, how did we get to that point, and why did we get to the point where so many vehicles are out of operation? Now, it makes me consider as well the truck issue and appliance issue that we see with the CFA, and I've had many conversations with CFA volunteers who are very frustrated at the slow rate of new fire trucks coming through. Many still have trucks that just have coverage for 2 volunteers, and the rest of the volunteers and the crew are exposed on the back of the truck. And those upgrades are required to give our volunteers the proper resources to be out there protecting our local communities. And sadly, it takes currently about 5.5 years from when they order a fire truck to the fire truck actually being delivered, because there is parts of the truck coming from different parts of the world and put together, and it's a very slow process currently. So what we're seeing is going to take years for us to have the proper equipment. And the CFA maintains close to 2,000 tankers, and many of them are well past their use-by date. We have crews out there with trucks that are over 35 years old, and there's a whole cascading system of trucks where old ones pass on to the next ones, and so it goes on. And so many CFA volunteers are out there actually raising funds themselves for appliances. They're out doing the sausage sizzles and meeting with local businesses and trying to raise the funds. And that is what they're doing off their own back to protect their local communities because they care. And we saw a petition recently signed by over 43,000 people which flagged concerns about the new emergency services tax, because sadly this government talks about that being for volunteers, but it is clear from speaking with volunteers that they know that that is not the case. We are seeing this government searching for more funds to cover the costs for public servants that were previously funded under the state budget. And yet now we have volunteers being taxed. And when I was at Axe Creek Station just last week, I spoke with a number of volunteers there, and two of them, I just found this extraordinary, their rates notice is in their wife's name. So even though they have been volunteering for decades, they are not eligible to receive the rebate. Now, I know CFA volunteers have written, and they've put this on social media as well, they have voiced the concerns of many brigades because this government have not been transparent about how many volunteers, CFA volunteers, are actually eligible or ineligible for the new emergency services volunteer rebate. They repeatedly cite figures over 55,000 CFA and VIC SCS volunteers as being covered by the scheme, and yet there's only, I think, nearly 29,000 operational members of the CFA, but there's no publicly available breakdown of how many volunteers meet the rebate's strict criteria. I spoke with another volunteer that was very frustrated because he'd been asked for information on the back of his rates notice. He said there is nothing on the back of the rates notice, but it's been such a slow process for many of them. And questions have been asked in Parliament, but it's just not, the government hasn't been forthcoming. So it's very clear that we need answers from the government about the number of CFA volunteers who meet the eligibility criteria, broken down by brigade and service category. Number 2 is the number of volunteers deemed ineligible and the reasons why. And 3, the number of volunteers who have applied, been approved or been rejected since the scheme opened. And I've also talked in this chamber today just about Axe Creek Station and the lack of facilities that they have at the station. It's one of the oldest brigades in Victoria, over 110 years old, and yet they don't have storage facilities there. They don't have. They only have a portable loo out the back. There's nowhere for women volunteers to change as well. And so I have put it to the minister to prioritise the need for further assistance there. But I do think that our volunteers, our emergency service volunteers, they don't ask for much, but they do deserve honesty and clarity and respect for the service that they provide our community. But it is so important that as a state we are prepared for bushfires, because we do have a lot of Crown land, and unfortunately the majority of major fires start in Crown land. So we need to reduce the burden that's on our volunteers by stopping it before it starts, and this government could do so much more, and that is what this motion is about today. It's about raising awareness and asking the government to take action, because yes, people, residents everywhere need to be as prepared as they can, and I encourage them to visit the CFA website, because there is certainly a lot of information about what you can do to be prepared for bushfire. But what we need the government to do is to take responsibility, read this motion and ensure that Victoria is better prepared for bushfires.